Welcome to the Bestiary, your one-stop shop for monster lore, info, and shenanigans. Join us as we take you through today's special feature.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Bestiary. My name is Morgan. Today we're here with a guest, Ryan, Durney? Did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Excellent. Cool. And our friend Eric Stalker is here to provide his wonderful knowledge. And John, our wonderful DM, as usual. So yes, do you wanna launch us off there?
I do, and I want to start by to introduce Ryan. I want to introduce a bit of how I came to know Ryan, and that was I was looking for a campaign that was set in the Abyss, and the Abyss is the realm of demons in Dungeons and Dragons, and today's topic is demons. So I'm not much of a dungeon builder. I'm a dungeon master, but I don't build the dungeons myself usually. I love to use other people's work for that. And I could not find many dungeons set in the Abyss, many campaigns, many modules, nothing really. And then I came across on DM's Guild from one search, I put in Abyss and Mirrors of the Abyss popped up. And Mirrors of the Abyss proved to be the answer to my prayers, my demonic prayers. Is this a prayers to the demons? Maybe that doesn't sound great.
That explains everything with how the campaign went. That explains everything.
Hey,
pretty much.
I think that explains why there aren't that many demonic or abyssal adventures, to be honest. I think that we have some kind of, sour aftertaste from the, witch hunt of the 80s. And I think that's sort of why people are afraid to write about the Abyss. Honestly, I think that's part of it.
Well, Ryan didn't just write about it. He drew it in all its demonic glory. Ryan Durney is not just a designer of games, but he is also an award-winning illustrator. Some of the awards he's won have been in 2004. He won Best of Fantasy in an international art competition. For about 5 years, he was the sole fantasy and sci-fi illustrator for Odyssey magazine. In 2010, he got Mom's Choice Award for a children's book, which book was that? I had to ask.
It was called Accepting Apples. And it was about
demons.
Yeah, you know what? Isn't that funny? We're already in the stark juxtaposition between the demons that I like to draw and then I have to flip back to my day work, which is, apples with little happy faces. And they're kind of just like mulling over what it means to be a child, basically. And, I have to keep those two worlds very, very separate.
and one of the other products that he's done that I think deserves a lot of attention is Birds of Lore, which was a Kickstarter. Do you want to tell us a bit about Birds of Lore real quick, Ryan?
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, I just got this crazy idea one day on a walk with Audrey. My wife is also an illustrator. And, I said, I've been thinking about, bird lore and how there's not a whole lot of mythology or, monster, bestiaries that concentrate on bird mythology. And, what can I write that would allow me to illustrate bird monsters in a very serious manner. And this connects to what we're talking about here, because I think by the end of it, I realized that, hey, a lot of this love is really just coming from my early days, spending time with the Monster Manual and D&D. I have to get back to D&D. I have to, just sort of go back to that sandbox and sit in it for as long as I can, because I know that's what's driving me to research monsters. And I, sort of, brought me back around.
Well, before we delve into mirrors and your take on demons, I did want to just give our listeners a little bit of an insight into what demons are like in Dungeons and Dragons. and just a general sense of kind of what they are in this lore, this mythology. Because I was actually surprised. I don't know, Morgan and Stalker, if when you guys were doing some research, you saw this too. I actually suspected that there'd be a lot more kind of influence from real world demon mythology. But it really seems that Dungeons and Dragons kind of built its own mythology.
Yeah, no, that is very much the case. Because a lot of real world demon lore has very significant ties to Christianity. It kind of infiltrated nearly everything except for the lesser known mythologies. But it's very different in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, what I saw was especially from a Christian, kind of background for it. Demons and the devil were all one singular thing, and the fact that they split it up and created a whole race of devils and a whole race of demons, and they were very different from each other, was a kind of an interesting approach, and actually made a lot more sense to me for a D&D RPG setting, as opposed to trying to keep them all together and trying to it's just a hierarchy kind of a thing. So I definitely saw that they took it and ran with it and did something completely different. So
I think where it ended up is fun. There's some good fun things about that. But I think the voyage was a little bit strange and influenced again by the Tom Hanks Mazes and Monsters fallout of the mid-'80s.
Let me explain this for a minute. If we're going to jump into Mazes and Monsters, I think not everybody will know what that is. So 1979, sorry, I'm going to actually start back a little bit. 1974 is when D&D gets published. And the year before, 1973, the very influential movie The Exorcist came out. And The Exorcist sort of awoke or reawoke in the modern era, at least in Western society, a new acknowledgement of demons and demon lore, and kind of is often pointed to as one of the main reasons behind Satanic Panic that launched in the mid 70s and continued throughout the 80s and even into the 90s. So in 1979, D&D is about 5 years old, and there is a college kid named James Dallas Egbert III. And James Dallas, that name, I love that name. James Dallas, he faked his own death. And he tried to kill himself. First of all, I should say that. He tried to kill himself in the tunnels under his university. And he took some medication. It didn't kill him. He survived. And he freaked out and realized, oh man, people are going to come looking for me and I don't want to be found. So he took himself off the radar and actually ran away and disappeared, using relatives to sort of travel away from the university and keep his location a secret. And his parents didn't know where he was. So, of course, they were panicked and they found a suicide note and all this stuff. And they hired a detective by the name of William Deere. And this private detective postulated that James Dallas Egbert III, who had played Dungeons and Dragons, and who his name sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons character, but he played Dungeons and Dragons, and he was probably playing it in the tunnels under his university, and this led to his demise. And honestly, if you read the accounts, William Deere put this forward originally as just hey, maybe this is what happened. And it blew up. People ran with it. He became the expert on the James Dallas case, to the point where William Deere began to say, well, this is my claim to fame. Yep, it was Dungeons and Dragons, and this game kills people. And this idea got perpetuated. Eventually, James Dallas was found, and he sadly did kill himself in 1980, unrelated to Dungeons and Dragons. But this myth perpetuated. And in 1982, Patricia Poling was the mother of another young gentleman who killed himself, also was a player of Dungeons and Dragons, and she formed BAD, which was Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. and it was an anti-Dungeons and Dragons thing. Now, where Monsters and Mazes comes in, and if you don't know this, it sounds like something somebody made up on a Reddit forum. Monsters and Mazes was a movie based on the death of James Dallas playing Dungeons and Dragons under his university, and it starred Tom Hanks as James Dallas. So that is out there, that exists, and it really.
No, missed that one.
and so that's some of the history to that. The fallout of this was that by second edition Dungeons and Dragons, which, Ryan, do you remember, was that 83, 84? Do you know the date on second edition?
That sounds pretty dang close. To be honest, back then, my friends and I barely made it out of the red box. Sad but true.
It happens.
We played, but as far as rules went, great friends, but that was about as far as they would go for rules. It had to be imaginative, and I had to be on my toes, and it had to be exciting, and probably, sadly, very murderous. But that's about as far as we got. I had a lot of books in art from second edition, and I had that huge poster by Larry Elmore above my desk that my mother got me of the red dragon looking over the slab of stone. Yeah, the full body red dragon. Amazing piece. Probably made me into an illustrator or helped.
That's nice. So. Well, second edition is where they made the decision to cut demons and devils out of Dungeons and Dragons. Stalker, you and I were talking about it earlier. You brought up what was your kind of summary of why they did it?
Well, I mean, like you said, it was basically like, they realized that there was this backlash to devils and demons, and I didn't know about BAD, the terrible acronym. That is a terrible acronym, by the way. But
very on the nose.
I knew, and I mean, I even remember this from my childhood, that there was this kind of like backlash to Dungeons and Dragons, and there was this kind of like, it'll lead you down a dark path. I heard the same arguments with like Harry Potter and things like that later on. So I was like,
yep.
This just keeps cycling. Okay. But they took it out, and then it got reintroduced back in the late 80s and 90s. So it completely,
Well, it sort of got reintroduced immediately as the Tanari, which were the demons, and the Batsu, which were the devils.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the Tanari. And then they retorqued that. Yeah.
They did. And that's kind of, I think that's what Ryan was talking about a little bit. You mentioned the Blood War, Ryan, I think. Or at least you said that you were talking about what the mythology of Dungeons and Dragons, you said, was interesting, but the voyage there in some ways was the greater story. The Blood War is the mythology that has been presented about demons and devils. And again, I really want to spend time this episode talking about the design of demons. We have Ryan here, who's actually built a campaign centered around demons and one demon lord or queen in particular. So I want to focus more on that because you can really look up the Blood War anywhere online. But in brief, the Blood War is a very, very cool realization of a consistent conflict between devils and demons that can basically never be won by one side or the other because it's chaotic evil versus lawful evil. Consistent.
I mean, that alone is a fascinating concept. Evil under law. I mean, gosh, not to put too fine a point on it, but I think we have some of that today. Evil under chaos is a lot harder to imagine, in my opinion. And honestly, it took me I think it took me the first year to wrap my head around what that means in D&D and why nobody's ever really written it the way that I imagine it needs to be, which is, chaos and random, effects just sort of unravel. It means writing a lot of random tables. It means throwing in a whole lot of mechanics that are one thing and they are another at the same time. I wanted an adventure that would have to play out differently every time. Not maybe, but it would have to play out differently. Those were the really root concepts. And, from there, as I suspected, the etymology and the origin of demons was every bit as chaotic as their play mechanics could be. You go back to, the supposed origin, and you have to start with, it's either Plato or Socrates, but they used to sit around and talk about philosophy. Obviously, we all know that. That was a big fashionable thing to do. And they needed, they couldn't say, hey, what if the Juggernaut fought Wolverine in a bar? They couldn't say that, so instead they used the term daemon. And, supposedly daemon just stood for generic, superpowered human being, a human being capable of doing things that the average person cannot do.
Like an avatar of the gods.
It's a spirit or divine power from the root word. Yeah.
Yes. And so from that point in time, you can go forwards and backwards. If you go backwards, you have to consider that everything the philosophers talked about came from the Etruscans and the Sumerians, because that's all we know. That's all we know about, how far back you can go on those concepts. If you go forward, when Christianity takes hold, it really absorbs so much monster mythology. I mean, I ran into this time after time with Birds of Lore. I'd be trying to figure out the root of some kind of bird-like mythological creature, and you hit Christianity and like, it's in pre-Christianity, it's some kind of harvest omen. Post-Christianity, it is a monster, kill it with fire. It's a rapist, it's coming for you in the night. Kill it and forget about it. So.
That's interesting. Do you think that comes from? Not to put judgment on any of these religions, but do you think that there was a lot more fear-based sort of proselytizing with the Christian mythology, and that was different from the earlier mythologies?
Well, if you compare it to like even Egyptian mythology had demons, but they were used as protectors of the underworld. Also, there was only one underworld. Everybody went there, or they were thrown into the pit and destroyed. Like their soul was just destroyed.
Damn.
Like they were eaten by I forget the name of the god. If it was Set.
Sounds right.
So you wanted to bribe Anubis to avoid Set. Got it.
It's the weight of your heart against a feather, and if your heart is heavier than the feather, you go and you're getting consumed.
Wow.
Except you could bribe your way in, and that's why pharaohs were golden, because they had so much gold they took with them that they bought their way in.
You could. It was rare though.
It was, yeah.
It was a rare instance.
It's a 1%er thing.
But I mean, the demons were used as protectors to prevent the random Joe Blow, from like, oh, I want to make it into the afterlife and sneak their way. They guarded the underworld. They'd any sort of evil connotation that they had was they were doing stuff on behest of the higher gods. They were messengers, or they were sent to, mess with somebody because a specific god said to go do that. It wasn't they were innately, evil or demonic as the Western world now thinks of the word.
Right. That's interesting because if you go back to Middle Eastern lore, then you have disgruntled guardians of Earth who were here before all that Christian stuff happened. And they were, quote, the original inhabitants of Earth, I think in spirit form. And of course, later on, they were labeled as the Jinn. And the Jinn were basically ghosts of the desert. If you go back to the Jinn, which I did in a lot of my thinking, then you run into the Book of Solomon, the Greater Key of Solomon. Okay, so supposedly, when you get into the Goetic demons, all those charming little etchings we have from the 16th century and onward. Morgan, I think I sent you some of those pieces of art because I am personally very charmed by both the art of the demon symbols, which I'll get back to in a second, and the etchings of the demons themselves, which were, oh my gosh, I mean, look how much personality went into each demon. So anyway, you have the Greater Key of Solomon, which is supposedly the first grimoire based on something that occurred hundreds of years before it was published. And it details all of these demon lieutenants, some kind of military for hell. It's like it goes on and on about who has how many legions, who teaches what. They're all teachers. Now that, I got to admit, that perplexed me. I had to stop and think about that for maybe a month. Teachers. Why are they described as teachers? And, all the Christian warnings and so forth, well, they're teachers, but you're going to pay the ultimate price. Okay, so the ultimate price is your soul. But each one, it doesn't say that in the grimoire, So, oftentimes for mirrors, I felt like I was, it's funny. You write about each one and you wonder well, according to the Christian mythology, writing about them, does that make me something? Am I in trouble now? And then honestly, I'm not, full disclosure, I'm not a believer. I don't disparage religion. I'm just personally not. To me, it's all interesting mythology, just full disclosure. But anyways.
Just to throw in there, that actually really ties into what I was reading from interviews with the D&D creators. It's funny because when all this a lot of it was started by the religious right. I mean, just not to judge, but that's where it came from. A lot of this anti D&D, talk and belief and movement. And it was funny because the responses of of Gary Gygax and Jim Ward and all these other people who worked on Dungeons and Dragons was like, no, we didn't think about that at all. We were just looking for big monsters for them to fight. We were just looking for guys. I mean, basically they thought about demons and devils as, fantasies Nazis.
Adversaries.
Yeah, they were built-in villains. You didn't have to explain them. You just go, it's a demon. And everybody goes, oh, evil, kill it, Whereas, if you have an owlbear, you're like, what the heck is an owl? What is that thing? How do you even...
It's fuzzy and cuddly. It can't possibly be evil.
I mean, how evil is a bear in the wild? It will attack you, but you don't think of it as evil. It's not trying to kill you mercilessly or scheme to undermine your efforts. It's just a bear, and an owlbear is just an effect of that too. So of course you want something a little bit more intricate with its machinations, or like a demon, just brutal in its trying to kill you. It's mindless violence.
It's easy to hate something that has no other drive other than destruction.
Right.
And that's where I was, earlier we mentioned how Dungeons and Dragons didn't seem to draw much on, as much as I thought it would, on, Christian mythology behind demons. Really, it seemed to draw most of its inspiration from Tolkien. Now, Gary Gygax wrote in Dragon Magazine 95. I can't remember the year, but he actually wrote an article on page, I want to say 12, where he talks about, he makes this bold claim, and I believe it was because lawyers were coming after him from the Tolkien estate, but he makes this bold claim that Dungeons and Dragons had very little inspiration from Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's a really...
Never mind the orcs and the goblins. It's fine. No, it's fine. This is fine.
One of the demons was called Balrogs. He had to change it to Balrogs.
And that's exactly my point, is he does mention the Ents, and he's like, yeah, they're kind of cool. And he mentions halflings. He's like, yeah, fuzzy-footed people. He goes on a weird tangent about how he's sad that Tom Bombadil isn't in Dungeons and Dragons. But then he comes back around. He never mentions the Balrog. And the Balrog were literally in the game. Balrogs was the original name of Balords.
Yep.
We don't
talk about that.
Before the Tolkien estate shuts us down again. But
yes, come on.
But he had to change them. So clearly, their idea of what the demon was a fantasy monster, not taken at all from these sometimes very rich backgrounds in real world mythology. And I wanted to pause anyways, because one thing we haven't really done is we haven't actually introduced really mirrors as a campaign. I think we should, before we jump into it again, just so people are aware of sort of what Mirrors is as a module and what it is.
Death.
You know what? Yeah, Morgan, you say death.
Lots of death.
Stalker, you say.
It's difficult to put into words how it just takes your knees and just chops them. Right? When you're like, you're making progress, you're going along, you're like, all right, I got this. I figured out this puzzle. It was kind of difficult. I think I've got this. And then it just is like, no, I'm going to kneecap you. You're not going that fast.
It is the Hunger Games as put on by an insane demon queen, meant for high-level characters who are literally dragged into her domain and made to play her insane game of survival over the course of potentially 20 or more chambers, each chamber representing a singular and unique death trap that they must figure out and find a way around or a way to avoid. Ryan, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Okay. To me, it was, it's a story about a demon who doesn't know she's a demon. And,
that makes so much sense now. I'm sorry. that filled in a piece I didn't even know was missing.
I mean, you start there and, I used to have this thing called, quote, the birthday game, where I was writing a love letter to Tomb of Horrors. I really like the old original book, and I like that it was written to, it was Gygax sort of, retaliating against early players who felt like superheroes. And, as a DM, I don't enjoy the aspect of players assuming they are superheroes. I see players as more or less people like us who pick up pointy bits of metal and put on some kind of flimsy armor and go out to fight things that are trying to kill you. And that would be a very, very dangerous field of work. I think a lot of us would probably trade what we do today for that. But let's face it, how many of us would really expect to constantly come out of that situation unscathed? I think that Tomb of Horrors was a great answer to, hey, this is a reflection of life. Life has a lot of random tragedy. Your 5 pages of paper might not survive every single adventure that you go on. And, I love that. I think that, the weekly game, if it loses its risk of death, then it's not a game anymore. It's just some DM basically reciting a story that they wrote, which I think is cool. I mean, we can all have collective storytelling and enjoy that, but it loses its game when nobody dies. And, you shouldn't, as a DM, ever go out of your way to kill somebody, but you should present circumstances in which a player may make choices and die. That's just how I see it.
I'd actually love to stop there briefly and just get a response. I mean, Eric and Morgan, you guys are both players in a game that, dare I say, I'm not afraid of death in my games.
Yeah.
See, we're on our third character in my...
He said, you don't
Excellent.
go out of your way to kill players. Just keep that in mind, John.
I do not go out of my way to kill you. Sometimes you guys go out of your way to commit suicide, I feel like.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hey, look, there's just one small rat. We'll kill it. And then it's like this horrible, like, level 20.
You know what? You shouldn't have killed that. You shouldn't have killed that rat.
It's a were-rat. We should have seen it coming. At this point, Stalker and I and Tyler, we go into each session like, all right, what's your backup character? Because we're fully expecting to die.
Well, let me hit you with this really quick. It's a bit of a side question, but what is the one mechanic in a video game that basically emulates D&D from the past 20 years that has disappeared from pen and paper D&D? And the answer is run. In games where you have the old-fashioned dungeon crawl systems where, you fight and you cast magic and you take turns and you clean dungeons out in those video games, there's still run, flee. How many times have you ever seen, John, how many times have your players fled the attack? Because they
a couple times.
Oh, okay. I'm impressed at all. If
Actually,
any player
yeah.
says
We started our. I think we have a similar sort of idea about how about game design, and maybe that's one of the reasons I was drawn to mirrors. But we started our campaign 4 years ago with essentially, I mean, they had a nice little mini dungeon to get used to the game, but the end of that was basically an unwinnable battle, and it was, and they lose the battle. They survive, but they lose the battle. And it was by like session 2. And the kind of one of the things I was trying to say with that battle was, hey, this is not a game where you're going to go in and win every fight. And I think it definitely, I mean, that set us up for the next 4 years as like, and I think, I mean, you mentioned video games. I actually think video games have set the modern player up, and even the modern DM, to think about, to forget about the flee command. You're right. Flee is in video games, but video games ultimately are a conquer to win format.
There's a lot of railroading in video games nowadays where, you know, like, okay, if you can't go forward, you back up half a step and grind, and then you come back and try and push your way through that system again. You can't avoid that particular conflict. It's going to come up and hit you anyway.
Right.
But I mean, I know like the one encounter that I'm remembering, John, was in Frazurzov, where we were like, oh, this ain't going well. And we like booked it and then tried another way.
That's actually true. But Morgan was playing a character who got her face nearly bitten off by a snake while they were trying to get in a back door to a dungeon. And they pulled out and did an entirely different approach because they decided that was not for them.
We tried 3 different approaches that fight. It was rough.
Now, John, was that snake there because you didn't want them to find the back door, or was the snake there already?
I said that I've mentioned in the past that I like playing other people's dungeons because I can blame them for anything that goes wrong, and I get to place the blame on Robert Kenzie for this one. That is from his Tomb of Hadjamoth. So he put the snake there. No, it was actually an unlucky moment. The snake got a critical hit on her while she was crouched and in a very
and crawling
bad position. So it was sort of the dice telling the story in that case.
Yeah, that was a pull me out. I'm almost dead. Nope.
My group, I took them through the 1E version of White Plume Mountain.
Morgan's done it.
They, just by their own volition, believe me, I did not nudge this in any way. They found that weird back door that's right in the beginning of the dungeon. I cannot believe authors used to do that. I kind of love it. I mean, it makes sense that the evil, governance of the dungeon would have a back door to get in and out of their offices. But so they dropped down into the end, the first 15 minutes, and I had to deal with that. And it was kind of amazing because I love chaos. That's what Mirrors is about. But it was chaos. It was utter chaos. And they pretty much biffed that. I mean, there's no surviving going in through the back door, really. So, we had a nice I
want
4
that
hours.
on a t-shirt. There's no surviving going in through the back door.
No.
Yeah, I think that we would be good to play D&D together someday, John. Anyways, back to Mirrors. So I had the birthday game, and, I realized this Ode to Tombs lacked flavor. It occurred to me that the Ode to Tomb, the birthday game, needed basically a personality to run the gauntlet. And, I think my brain is it's like a jar, an empty can of change. There's like coins jangling around in it. And I think that I wish I could say it was a beehive, but it's more like that. I hope
that's on your Tinder profile.
Well, one of the coins that came up was my memory of Carl Sargent's Shadow Archetypes. I have no idea what made me think of that. I am not a scholar. As I said, I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm not a scholar as much of D&Ds.
What is the Shadow Archetypes? What is this?
This author, Carl Sargent, wrote 4 or 5 shadow archetypes. I think he was trying to say that these are personalities in the abyss who encompass a lot of Earth myth history. So I believe, I mean, and I invite you to read the original 3-4 paragraphs he wrote about Esheballa. Now,
is that how you pronounce it? Is Esheballa?
I used to say Esheballa. So
that's how we say it.
Yeah, I used to say that. I don't know what happened over time. It became Esheballa. I think it's because I see her, and I'm about to say this, I see her as a partial blend of the Japanese fox demon, the nine-tailed fox. I think she is definitely inspired by that. And I think she is inspired by the goddess Ishtar, which I alluded to researching some old original stuff there with Sumerian and Etruscan goddesses and whatnot.
And was she a goddess of fertility and the moon?
Yes, that's why if you... we should get back to this chamber, but...
Also, war, wasn't she?
Say again?
War as well.
Did you say whore?
No.
No, honestly, the goddess Ishtar in, I think now in modern New Age sort of thinking, she is some kind of goddess of the quote unquote temple whore.
I will say, Morgan, if they release a sequel to God of War called God of Whore, I'm in. I
would put money down that there is a game out there already labeled that way.
Somewhere on Newgrounds, you've got that.
Oh, no, she was. She was sex, war, justice, and political power.
Yeah. Yes. Very interesting stuff with Ishtar. But also her name, going backwards, sounded like Yoster or Eoster, and it connects to Easter, and it connects to Easter pre-Christian as a fertility holiday, which was all about sex and yada, yada, yada. So some of Esheballa's true names, which that is a sub-goal of playing mirrors. If you're playing it to win, if you don't find her true names, you're probably screwed as level 15s, 16s, or 17s in that dungeon. The only way to disarm her is to startle her with remembrance of her true names, which she has forgotten because she has forgotten that she was or did become a demon. So shocking her with her true names and shocking her with the memories of, I hint that she if you recall the sinister, the infamous bedroom chamber,
which they actually went to that. They only did about, I think you guys did 4 or 5 chambers. And then you did.
It felt a lot more than that, but yeah.
You did one of my own devising as well, which was related to a character within our campaign, like story wise. But they did do the bedroom. They actually, I think, started with the bedroom chamber.
Yeah, that was the first one we jumped.
I've never heard of that before. That's interesting. What a crash course. I mean, I noticed that the first time I brought that personality in, it was almost 2 a.m, and a lot of these guys, mostly guys, were half asleep at that point, to be honest. They're all work a day. Of course, we all are. They all sat upright, and I realized that they liked engaging with her directly. And then I realized, as things devolved into madness in her final chamber, because there was no way they could win, I also realized that having an arch villainess that used all sorts of, feminine, power, including the idea that, hey, maybe just randomly she might be seductive. And if she is, you might fail checks and she might be able to, bite your arm off in one chamber and seduce you in the next. And there's nothing you can do about it probably unless you pass the checks. And I think that terrified them, honestly. I think that they kind of lost it in the last chamber, and they were really up and awake, and really enjoying seeing how she finished toying with them. And I thought, okay, that's it. Definitely my counterpart to a Sirak or Vecna is her. It's her. And I decided right then and there that Esheballa deserved her time as an arch-villainess. And I've been dwelling on, I think, hearing her voice in my head for years, basically like telling me how to write her, and it's weird now that it's done.
Wow. That leads me to a few questions. But I wanted to make Morgan or Stalker, did you guys have any responses to that first?
Yeah, I think the most disconcerting thing about the dungeon was the fact that there was always this weird sexual undertone even when it was a death trap. Like she was like almost kind of just teasing you sexually as she's like, you're going to die, but also like, you might get a little action in the middle. And I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all.
I think it makes, how do I put this? I'm not a psychologist, but I think it interferes with the male assumptions about sex. And I think that, and it really wasn't the point of the dungeon. Let's be honest here. That's just it's a fun, like, unconscious, level to it. Now, also, not only is she that, but she also admires. She's aware. I did some, fourth wall kind of destruction. She's aware of Vecna, and she's aware of Acererak somehow. And, she spent time studying archvillains and wanting to be like them, and then putting her own spin on it, which, Stalker, is exactly what you just said. The reason I dwelled on her memories of her early attempts at being an actual goddess of fertility was that I wanted people to get the notion that she tried, but when you set up your real estate in the abyss, it is going to pull you down into the drain plug. It is going to corrupt everything that you try to do that has any kind of non-chaotic evil behind it. You can't just put your throne in the abyss and expect to maintain an honest, following from your worshiping crowd. So and that's why there are all those specific memories of her, even paintings of her as a legitimate fertility goddess that people actually appreciated for a time. And, there's this awful, I didn't go into it because I didn't want to be too overtly sexual, but there is definitely a moment you can see if you play the whole thing where she begins to lose track of animal sacrifice as opposed to, and also sexual fertility rituals. It all just sort of blends together into something awful and horrific, where people die and they're sacrificed and blood becomes the symbol instead of fertility. And, I think that could happen. I think that the line between someone who has 100% sexual power over her disciples, it could become, in the abyss, it would become corrupt and depraved at some point. I think there's no way to get out of that. You declare yourself as a fertility goddess, you're going to be a fertility demon, and it's all going to go to hell.
I have to say, she was one of the most difficult characters, NPCs I've ever run in a game, because there is a lot. Well, there's a few things that are difficult about her. One, you have all these warring aspects of her personality. And at any given time, I feel as a DM, especially if you were doing sort of a shorter version like we were, which they weren't going to go through every chamber. They weren't going to get to glimpse every aspect of her. I wanted to create both a sense, like you had in your book, of her sort of sadness and tragedy, as well as her current Joker insanity, where it's like you cannot sympathize fully with this creature right now because she will kill you. But at the same time, I wanted the players to get a sense of there is something sadder here. There's something, and I didn't want to fully outline it. I think you do a really good job in Mirrors. And I want to say too, for listeners, Mirrors, we'll put a link to it, and we've got, and I'm going to post a bunch of the art online too, but like, Mirrors is a big product. I think it's like 280 pages, if I'm not wrong.
300.
300. There we go. And that is full of tons of information that you will never necessarily use in your game, but you will read, and you can almost sit at home with that book at night and read it and gain like a story of a demon. And that level of detail is in there. And translating that to a character is a challenge, but a really interesting one. And I wanted to throw this at you, Morgan and Stalker, because you played the game. Was that sense there? Was that sense of sort of there's a tragedy, an unknown tragedy here, Did that come through? Or did you just hate her as demon boss?
My character was focused on kind of hating her because she pulled us in to her game.
Oh, we should explain your character because you had a really interesting character that you came up with.
Both characters hated her, to be fair. Carrick's like, oh, hey, I we got pulled into this game and I don't want to play a game, so
Describe what happened to Carrick. Tell us what happened to Carrick.
Well, so we get pulled into the game and we eventually get to the room with basically a statue.
It's the library.
It's the library, yeah.
The library.
The statue
Nice.
that reminded me of like the birth of Rome, like Romulus and Remus,
Yes.
right?
That's exactly what it is. The Capitoline Wolf is what it's called.
Yeah,
Good call.
and I was sitting there and I was like, okay, so this room is just trouble brewing. And we were playing with Kayvon, and I think Kayvon's in the chat. So Kayvon, this is a story also for you because this is you did this. And he decided to just be chaotic himself and revived the Lich. Alex,
Oh,
right?
really?
Yeah.
They I should tell
Intentionally.
you, Ryan, they figured out immediately. They're like, this is a lich, and it's gonna, like, if we put this gem in here, it's gonna revive the lich. And they,
Oh, wow.
And you know what? We had been playing it safe for the entire time that I've been playing with them. And I was like, all right, you know what? Let's do something a little bit different to spice things up. I'm okay with this.
My character, meanwhile, was off in a portal dealing with her own stuff, so I wasn't even part of this conversation as it was happening. I just came back and was like,
So
wait, what?
we were an undermanned party fighting this lich. And of course, my character, being a paladin, was like, okay, let's charge in, which was a terrible idea. And we had an NPC that was also a paladin that I had like in very intricate ties with, and we both ended up taking the lich down with us, but we both died.
but then Stalker and I started talking about who his next character would be, and I don't remember. Like, I think the idea was sort of mostly yours, Stalker, with maybe a little bit of input from me. But do you want to share? I mean, it was a cool idea.
So I don't want to give any details away because my character has some backstory that the group doesn't know about yet. And
Just tell the backstory regarding to Esheballa, because that they know.
so Esheballa has been running this game over and over again for what, like 100 years? More?
Oh, well, centuries.
Centuries, yeah.
We don't know. Yeah, it could be a long time, or you guys could have been the first.
Yeah.
In my game, it was millennia.
Yeah, and so I got like my second character got pulled into this game, and his entire party got wiped out. He won the game, like somehow. She allowed him to live, but she turned him into basically like a toy that she played with him for a little bit, and then she kind of like forgot him to go focus on the game again. And so he survived by like hiding out in basically a corner pocket of the game map, essentially, and was forgotten. And he was like going insane. And then the next party came along, and right before he was going to like end his life because he was like, I'm done. This is too long. And then he was like, wait, I can escape maybe. And so
That's excellent. And let me just say that I expected maybe 1 in 20 parties to, invoke Alix Ilmeric.
That's the lich.
Yeah, let me be honest here right now. This is a sad thing if it never happens, but what I really wanted to do with Alix was have an adventure where I invite 20 authors to basically, my idea is that Alix brings 50 boats to shore, and they appear to be derelict until they are explored. Each boat is its own dungeon chamber, and this is what Alix would do like the town's wiped out, of course, so you have to go investigate, and this is what happens with Alix. He brings a fleet of dungeon rooms to a town and just waits. But my notion about the Lich, he's another serial murderer, basically, that Esheballa admires, had some, random artifacts that she thought or maybe didn't think were applicable to Alix, threw them into her gallery because she is careless and she doesn't finish things, she doesn't investigate. She's not necessarily very smart, if you notice. She has other people build her stuff. She's, in my mind, her attribute would be charisma, an evil kind of charisma, not intelligence, not wisdom. She, so that gallery is kind of a willy-nilly thing that she cobbled together and then sort of abandoned to the Merilith, who I jokingly, this was actually Christopher Rush's idea, to have the Merilith be kind of a librarian and a retired Merilith, somebody who is done fighting. And I love that idea, so I kind of ran with it, and I kind of pulled in some jokes from the first Ghostbusters movie, which you'll find there are many. The way she shushes the players and the way that they have to announce themselves. She says, "Are you a god?" And the smart answer is to say yes. Don't say.
They did
she
it.
Doesn't know. Oh no. Yeah. So Esheballa,
that was another fight.
Oh really? You had to fight the librarian?
They actually beat the librarian. They actually, even before she could escape at the end, they got her and got her.
Yeah,
sword.
it was a smoother fight than we thought it would be. And then we fought a lich. Yeah, those swords were awesome too. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I wrote so many things for that. Yeah, I really like the gallery and the library. I think that it probably took me the longest. That and of course, Follow the White Rabbit, one of the climactic chambers where I had to write 50 demons.
What was your favorite chamber in Mirrors of the Abyss?
Okay, it'd be easier to just say what was my favorite in-game. I gotta say, I really liked the secret area where Esheballa in her peak of vanity made a statue that was something like 180 feet tall or something crazy like that and put it out in the middle of her ocean. And the players find the remnants of that. She embodied it for one hot minute, and then something happened. There was some kind of conflict, which I like. There was some kind of, and I mean, you're kind of led to believe that the demon Abraxas, who is holed up in a tower along the beach, he is one of the only demons in open opposition to her and he resides in her own plane. And, could she use her godlike powers to destroy him in her own plane? I would assume beyond his few ways to wiggle out of that, I'm assuming she could, but she doesn't realize it. She doesn't, she just would rather not go there with him. So he's useful to her. He's an inventor. He made half the traps in her domicile. So, I mean, I kind of like, there's something about that, all those classic modules had living statues. It's sort of it's a tip of the hat. And to go back and do an interlude that kind of tips your hat to something very classic, it just appeals to me. I'm not trying to make it better. I'm just trying to write, as if I was able to write in that time, and I think the appeasements are fun because you have to think like a demon, which I make you do a lot in the module. So yeah, I really like the gallery and the library. I think that it probably took me the longest. That and of course, Follow the White Rabbit, one of the climactic chambers where I had to write 50 demons. And, but the gallery definitely, you guys were talking earlier to call back two things. One, she has vulnerable moments. And there, Jonathan, if you read the whole way through the whole dang thing, there for you as the DM to decide what she lies about and what she misremembers.
Mm-hmm.
I want each DM to decide, is she just a crazy liar, or were there tragedies that forged her? Now, I find most people are way more comfortable with a serial murderess who had a tragic backstory. I find that interesting, albeit maybe perhaps a little tiny bit sexist. We don't wonder about Vecna's tragedies and we don't wonder about Asarak's tragedies. But when we have this female demonic goddess, we wonder, well, what could have made this poor demigod, of fertility go so wrong? It's like I actually prefer personally that she either misremembers or lies.
Sex is something that comes up in our it's a classic part of our show.
That's cool.
we always talk about the procreation of our monsters. I will briefly say I will talk about demon procreation real quick. I'm gonna give you 3 different points on demonic procreation because there are a lot of demons. back in the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, the first edition, they actually, after the Tolkien estate said, no, you can't call them Balrogs, their answer was to be very creative and called them Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, Type 4, and Type 5 demons.
That's super original. Yeah.
I mean, ridiculous. They didn't come up with names for them. Literally, if you go back to the early, that's what they are. It's like those types. And then there's some demon lords that are mentioned. And I just want to, I do want to go through real quick to give everybody a sense of the different kinds of demons. So eventually these Type 1 through Type 5 went away. And by modern D&D, we have the following types of demons. At the very top, and this will get into sexuality too. Each one has its own.
We'll get there. Hold on.
There's a lot of sex in this conversation. Just wait for it. This is foreplay. So the very top of the hierarchy are these things called the oberifs. And the oberifs don't really exist too much anymore. What they were was the abyss kind of started as a bit of a procreational act. The abyss was another universe that essentially merged forcibly, and I'm going to say it basically forced itself upon our universe. That is how the abyss came to be. It was another universe that exploded onto ours, and then like a pustule sort of burst and has continued to grow ever since. The original demons were the oberifs that kind of led that charge. Those demons included Dagon and Pazuzu, who's from The Exorcist, and other demon names, but there's very few of them left because they were eventually supplanted by the demon lords. And the demon lords are all unique demons, each one with its own depravities, and some of them are very based around sex, like Grotst, who's the demonic lord of pleasure and seduction. Others have their own method of procreation, like Jubilex, who is the demon lord of oozes, and you can picture kind of what that's like. You've got
No, I don't want to. No, thanks.
We've got Zgutmi, who's like I think that's how you pronounce it. Is the goddess, the demon goddess of fungi. So she spreads in her own way. And you've got Demogorgon, who's the most famous because he's been used in Stranger Things now. Below them are the Tanari, those are like the classic demons. Those are any other kind of demon you can find. And a lot of those demons procreate simply by existing. They're like a cancer. They spread, they infect, and more sort of just pop up because they are. But one of the demons that I want to get to is the Lomara. That is Loumara. And these demons had my favorite form of their origin, their sort of how they were created and came to be. And they were created when Demogorgon tricked a pantheon, an entire pantheon of gods, into thinking they could destroy the abyss. And these gods came into the abyss, and immediately the demon lords all turned on them as Demogorgon had planned. And the abyss itself, which is kind of considered to be a living being, took form and devoured them. And the pantheon was wiped out. What remained in the abyss was the dreams and nightmares of these dead gods. And those dreams and nightmares procreated and created the Laumara, which each one is a twisted version of a dead god's dream. That is one of the coolest, most metal backstories I've ever heard for any creature ever. But the other thing I wanted to bring up is I had forewarned Ryan that we bring out demonic sex in our podcast, and you had brought it back to a really interesting point about sexuality in RPGs today. I wondered if you wanted to go into that.
Well, I did get some mentions of confusion, I would call it, from actually some very kind reviews. I appreciate the reviews. But some people thought I was trying to force Esheballa onto a player, or in an uncomfortable kind of rapey kind of way. And that was never the intent. If you read that chamber carefully, she, out of boredom and out of wanting, it's really an urge to show off in her own domain. She toys with seduction, but it doesn't necessarily, it's really per group. If your group is comfortable with extended role play about what could happen in that situation, that's up to your group. But basically, if you're talking about her chamber, her bedroom, which she allows the players to kind of bumble into, she traps certain players who she thinks basically touch. She arbitrarily chooses to seduce whoever touches the right thing in her bedroom. She pretends that matters. She uses that as context. And, if you read that whole passage carefully, the proceedings are interrupted by she senses the presence of her, and I did not write this, brother/lover, Derogor. That's Carl Sargent's idea. He shoved incest into the four paragraphs that he wrote about Esheballa. So, yeah. Now, I didn't really go into that, but once she senses him, she is enraged and she leaves that moment. What happens in that few minutes is up to each group, But as far as procreation goes, per Esheballa, you mentioned earlier, there are some sad, tragic moments in that adventure. And if you lead them into the Black Tower, I think I named it Where Demons Don't Go. That is actually, to me, and now as a father, profoundly sad. And again, this is Carl Sargent's invention. She has a string from all of her sexual exploits, and from Derogor, she has a string of demonic children which she abandoned. And I thought, I have no choice. If I'm really trying to detail her plan, I have no choice but to write about the fate of those poor children that she created and disregarded. So I think that as far as sad vulnerabilities, the Black Tower is probably the biggest. As far as procreation goes, I think, each demon, especially someone like her, has memories of being something else before.
Well, our group didn't get to the Black Tower, but one of the things I liked that you did with that was, I don't think that sex, we don't often consider, sex in our D&D games. For some obvious reasons. We don't want to just, most people don't want to come to a game and just play sex. Role play sex.
Well, you're forgetting Aldrin.
Okay. Tyler is an exception, but and he's very good at it. So
it's just the one character. It was great.
But we also forget that sex goes beyond just the act of procreation and the physical. It has consequences and offspring and emotion and all these other bits to it that I don't think often get used in games, and certainly don't get used in modules. And it was really interesting to read about Esheballa's, like you said, her discarded offspring, you could see how her fertility had consequence.
Yeah, totally. And then if you start to feel sorry for her, then you realize what your goal is in that chamber. She wants you to get rid of one of the oldest two problematic children who are becoming so powerful. She's afraid they will burst from the Black Tower and in some way usurp her or leave. And I find that to be kind of tragic too. But if we're talking about that's kind of the grim side of it. Now, if we're talking about some funny things about it, I told you, John, last night, there are 2 times in my career as an illustrator that I got in trouble for boobs. And
oh man.
One, I had a client, this is a children's book, actually, the one that won product of the year in 2016, Princess Willow. Great author, great client. But she asked me to draw fairies that, quote, resembled Tinkerbell. I just researched Tinkerbell kind of in a zombified fashion. I wasn't really thinking too hard about it. But if you look at early drawings of Tinkerbell, she was very curvy, she was idealized. Modern Tinkerbell I now found is a little more, I don't know, but early Tinkerbell was definitely someone's sweetheart drawing. I assure you that as an illustrator.
And then she was played by Julia Roberts and everything changed.
Who could take the form of a woman that would be the same size as an actual woman? Yes. I think that probably confused a lot of people, a lot of kids even more. But
Hook was a very confusing movie for a lot of reasons.
So I did the scene with the fairies, and they were not in any regard obscene, but the client kept making me go back and reduce the breast size. And I was like, really? I mean, it got to the point where I was like, all right, look, when you shrink down the feminine form as an artist, I'm just talking about shapes and colors and composition. It's helpful if you want to show female fairies. I mean, it's helpful if they have baseline curves. That's just how I see it. And we're not talking about anything that was crazy here at all. But I mean, you said Tinkerbell, I said to the client, and that's what I did. And in the end, sadly, I mean, the client has to win. I mean, that's fine. If it's for children and that bothered her, that's fine. But the other time I got into big trouble, evidently, with boobs is the image I chose to do for the cover of Mirrors. And wow, when I released that book, and I was ever so proud, I was the proud papa of a new book for a weekend. You're on cloud 9, and I think I went outside to paint a windowsill on a Sunday, and I came back in and realized that my very innocent little post on one of the DM's Guild, side pages, not the official one, I had been summarily attacked for the image of Esheballa having cleavage on the front. And it went on and on and on. I was a sexist because I chose to depict a demon goddess that Carl Sargent invented, not me, who was, quote, a personality that used seduction to, quote, devour males. And I had, if you look at that cover, as an artist, let me just say that if you look at if your eye follows the eye between the title, it goes like a triangle down to the breast line and then to the left of the reflection. The idea is actually, this is how illustrators think. You have a simple circle or triangle or a simple shape where you lead the eye. And, that's how I thought of those boobs. They were there to lead the eyeball in a triangle.
What's interesting about that is that the original covers where demons are depicted in Dungeons and Dragons, some of the earliest first edition stuff, is full of not just the triangle, but the whole thing with, nipples and everything. It's naked boobs in those books. I'm sure that didn't help, bad. That didn't make them happy, but it's funny to think that in the modern day, this would still be a concern.
It's a weird thing for people to get up in arms about, especially knowing her background, that she was a fertility goddess. Breasts are a big part of that. It's raising babies. That's what they are built for, is to produce milk, and it's part of that fertility thing. So it's kind of really funny for them to be all like, how dare you? Because that's just, that you'd think that would be kind of
We're not going to talk about what demon milk tastes like, by the way. That's not coming up in today's podcast.
Your imagination went there.
Now it will come up in comments, John.
Yeah.
If they ask it, I'm forced. If they ask it, I'm forced to answer, I have to say.
But if we all watch that, and it's like we can't handle cleavage from a trickster goddess, but we all watched Luke Skywalker grab one of the boobs of a beach monster. I don't know where we're at. I think a lot of the same people who are sensitive about sex in D&D all watched Game of Thrones. And I think I don't have to explain that kind of dichotomy right there with your mind. I love Game of Thrones. I love the books especially, but they are full of adult situations, shall we say. Gygax intended it to be a game for adults. And if you're going to illustrate with your words the beheadings and the gore and the violence, treating sexuality that might pop up, even in a very innocent form, as foreboding, sends the message, and I think this happens in America all the time. The message is, gratuitous, extreme violence is great, and sex has to be, it's frightful and something to sweep under the rug. I don't understand that at all. In the very least, it should be fun and a joking kind of part of the game. You're telling me these adventurers wouldn't make sexual jokes? All those campfires, all those times walking trails, and you're telling me that never once would one of them crack wise, and by the way,
if it was our game, it happened about every 10 footsteps. So
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Depending on the cast at the time.
With Aldrich.
Right.
Morgan, do we have a shot do we have any questions in the chat?
Do we have a shot?
Sorry, I don't know. I was thinking about shot.
What? Now I want to drink, John. Thanks. Amy TB asked, is there any way that a demon can have an actual relationship with another species?
Well, okay, I think I don't know anymore if this is my quote or something I read, honestly, but I wrote in the book somewhere, what is a demon but a foul wind? And if I coined that, then wow, kudos to me, but I'm not sure if I just read that somewhere. I think that if you summarize Earth's myth history about demons, they are disembodied and looking for bodies to inhabit. Even I just reread some of the first monster manuals stuff about demons, and there actually is quite a bit about possession and about if they lose their material body and what happens. There's consequences. But I think that probably it also there's a whole bunch about true names, and I think I wrote in Mirrors. The reason that true names have an effect on demons is that it reminds them of both what they were before and what they were before they were corrupted. Obviously, relationships would have been a part of that. So I think that there'd be memories of romantic relationships somewhere down deep, which would be very painful. That's why a true name probably controls them. It floods their corrupt mind that has been reduced to nothing but hate and blood, and it reminds them of being something else that wasn't completely ruined. And of course, there would have been relationships and romantic thoughts, and who knows, demons could inhabit a body, or some of them could shape change and choose to try to, as she did, have careless, relations with mortals or other demigods. I think it would, and what are the rules for succubi and incubi in D&D? Because in the myth history, they would take, I think it was one of them I think the succubus takes the form of a male.
No, succubi are female, incubi are male.
No, I mean, there's something specifically about the sperm where they have to transfer it. It's a weird thing. I think that in the Earth's myth history, they take the form of an incubi, transfer the sperm back to their succubus body. It's really weird. Please
it's like IVF.
Look it up someday.
It's like IVF. Okay.
Yeah, I know that's not the case in D&D, but there's some weird thing about that. I noticed that succubi have lost their connotation as either demon or devil, which I find very strange.
Well, I know that one kind of approach to this question too, Amy Chibi, is that one problem with demons as written in D&D lore is that they are, as I mentioned before, incarnates of this abyssal pustule that has burst and is continually spreading. So each demon brings with it a cancerous sort of infection of insanity. So that is not just in their nature that is in their being, that is in their actual physical presence, soul presence, if you will, in the universe. So if you were to engage in a relationship with a demon after a short time, probably, or a long time if you're a stronger willed creature, you are also going to become insane, and eventually you yourself will become a demon. And in some ways, this actually explains some of how the demon lords are created, because the demon lords basically survive long enough that they are so infected by the abyss that they gain mutations that are unique and powerful. And if they can survive as the period of other demons realizing they are becoming more powerful, because other demons, it's a constant battle for hierarchy, then eventually they become demon lords. I think what's interesting about what Ryan is describing with Esheballa specifically is that one of her mutations could be, a DM could consider this, the ability to sort of foster long-term relationships. Like the mutation could be that being with her doesn't intrinsically drive you insane. And so you are able to sort of fall in love or lust with this demon queen. And that could have really interesting consequences.
I would call it lust. And if I were the DM of a group who was comfortable with the Esheballa having actually seduced a player and they survive, I guarantee you there would be, since time passes differently in the Abyss where you could make that claim, I guarantee you I would bring that child back into the game, searching for its father with very bad consequences. I would definitely do that.
John,
hey,
don't get any
stalker,
ideas.
Stalker.
No.
I think
Did she get you, Stalker? Did she get you?
I mean, I was her plaything for, I don't know, however many years
that's
after
right.
I
he
definitely won the game.
His second,
I mean,
his second character.
I forgot. That's right. We were privy to the one ending where she gets excited because you survived her game by some way, shape, or form. And she, so you're a celebrity for 5 hot minutes in the Abyss, and then it's like reality TV. You're sort of just...
and they were very hot minutes. So they're people still watch the tapes in the Abyss, and yeah,
went viral.
There's probably a little stalker running around somewhere.
Okay, first of all, there's so many things that are going to be wrong with that child. It's going to be a mess. I'm just saying that is not a good thing.
I love this idea. I love this idea.
Thanks so much, Ryan. You get one of my characters killed, and now I'm going to have to deal with like the worst child ever.
Just think of the custody battles.
It probably won't come back into this story. We're probably safe.
Knock on wood right now.
I'm gonna find a way. This is gonna happen.
It's coming.
Dang it.
Do we have other questions here?
Yes. So Jake for realsies asked that that this might have been answered earlier, but what was Gary Gygax's relationship with demon lore? Why did he put them in when he probably knew that it would lead a religious pushback in contrast to owlbears or oozes? We did kind of touch on this earlier as far as it was...
Oh, okay. So I never got to really comment on that earlier, though. I actually... I found some evidence that Gygax really wanted it to be a lot darker than it was. You can kind of see how abyssal mythology was building in a very... I mean, look at Igwilv and the early stuff about the grimoire. And you can kind of see that he was sort of building on a really dark demonology for the abyss. And I love that early stuff, the hints. I think that I find it profoundly sad that his creation was sort of pulled away from him and steered in a direction that would appeal to younger children. That's just how I feel about it. I know when you broaden the audience, you sell more books. So it's not a very popular attitude. It wasn't in the 80s, and it's not now, especially because broad audience seems to be the key word still. So everything I write, I kind of try to go back and see what he started. That's just my feeling on the matter. But
I do want to touch for those who don't know, Igwilv is she was an early character, I think played by one of Gygax's, either one of the originals who played the game. And in any case, Igwilv became a corrupted character who wrote the Demonomicons, which is like the Necronomicon for D&D.
Right. I riffed on that for the book. I had to mention it. Basically, it's like the first grimoire.
There's a few other questions I spotted on the chat that I just wanted to touch on briefly before we go into our final questions for Ryan here. The first one was Mamba said I should mention Orcus. I think Orcus is a demon lord, and he's a particularly famous one. Partially because he's the demon lord of undeath, and that kind of mixes two really integral sort of primal things we think about when we think about dark magic and sorcery. We think about undeath, we think about demons, and he's both. So yay. One thing I want to mention for folks is at some point in the future, we are going to do a demon lord episode. There's so much to cover on a topic like demons that it can't fit all into one episode. And I kind of stayed away from going too deep into the demon lords. I will throw out one bit of trivia on the demon lords that I think people will find fun to sort of mention them here. But we'll do a bigger episode on them later. And that bit of trivia is on the Demogorgon. As I mentioned, he's kind of become more famous these days because of his Stranger Things references. But Demogorgon was originally he was a mistranslation, and not just by the Dungeons and Dragons folks. He was mistranslated by Boccaccio, who was, I believe, an Italian scholar. I might be wrong on his country of origin, but he was translating a text by Lactantius or Lactantius Placidius, who was a Greek scholar from the 4th century, who was commenting on a text by Plato, where Plato mentioned the demiurge. And the demiurge, according to Plato, was sort of this undescribable force that had crafted the universe, not so much like a god, but in some ways analogous to what we now know as the Big Bang, like a sort of a cosmic event that crafted the universe. However, Boccaccio mistranslated this and misunderstood this, and he mistranslated it as Demogorgon, and he misunderstood it to be a supreme god that existed before the Christian God. And his version of this was widely read by medieval scholars. And this idea that there was this primal god before God persisted through history. And that is where Demogorgon came from and where he was drawn upon for D&D. And in some ways, that became the origin for all the demon lords, these ancient sort of primordial supreme beings that existed in the early days. And Boccaccio's, if anybody's interested, his description, his mistranslation, started with the genealogia, how do you say that? Genealogia Deorum Gentilium, which was a 1360 publication on mythology.
All right, just say that name 3 times fast, just real quick.
Well, yeah, thanks. Yeah, right.
Say that, and what was it? Lactatius Pantius that you said earlier?
Lactatius Pantius is going to be Tyler's new character.
No.
That's
No.
that would actually fit him. I actually have a question. I don't know if this even has a good answer, but is there any way for a demon to be redeemed from chaotic evil to potentially chaotic good? Or is it just a lost cause?
I think by the rules of the Abyss, that would be extraordinarily difficult, but it would make one hell of an arc story. Well,
let me ask you this, Ryan. Do you think you could redeem Esheballa? Is there a way for a party to do that?
Okay, I love that you asked that because I got into this weird. I'm my day job right now. I'm on panel 43 of a science fiction comic. I am drawing, inking, everything. And the author, who is his name is James Self, and he loves to talk about this kind of stuff. So he had me on the phone. He read Mirrors because he hires people like me and he wants to know everything that we've done. He's a really cool guy. So he argued with me for 30 minutes straight about how he would redeem Esheballa. And I kept, every time he would come up with something, I would say, well, this is what she would do, and it involved something horrible. Finally, he just gave up, but he said, I still think she could be redeemed. But that's his way of resolving characters. And maybe I find myself to be very pragmatic per our times. Maybe some people find me pessimistic, but I would say Esheballa's redemption happens right, if you play it to the end and you defeat her, she only realizes right there before her obliteration where that weird kind of extra goddess entered. And, John, I don't think you did this ending, but the actual ending is that she finishes performing her play. It said Carl Sargent wrote that she was an extreme patron of the arts. So the way I parsed that was that she had actually written a few plays that were a big deal, especially in the Abyss, amongst the quote unquote cultured demons, if that's really a thing. But she performs a play before her death and finishes the last part of it. And then that weird sort of, overture kind of goddess that I sort of alluded to, Discordia, who is more or less a construct to finish the story. She is an embodiment of the Abyss itself, and she enters to obliterate Esheballa, and Esheballa has some very from the heart questions, and Discordia basically says, well, hey, look, you thought you were kind of a big deal here, and you didn't realize that you were just another demon goddess. And, so if there was a moment of redemption, it would have been then, and she didn't regret anything. So
one quick last question. What would your demon name be? This is for everybody on the panel. Pick what would your demon name be?
I always name my character Ivix, and I've always believed that Ivix would probably spin out in the latter levels and take some sort of horrible temptation. He's always been a bit of a greasy wizard, and I'm going to say I'm going to end this with a declaration which will further polarize anybody who considers me worthwhile. And Elise, I think it's okay to say, quote, that's what my character would do.
we do that all the time.
I do it all the time.
You'll find some very outspoken groups saying that that's like the cardinal sin of being a player, but I don't really believe that. So Ivix was always a bit of a greaseball wizard. So
well, I one more question. Do you know what kind of demon it would be, Ivix?
I would, anything that's not
too complicated, John.
Well, anything that's not, for demons, you have to ask, where would they start? He would end up one of the, I wrote like maybe six demons in mirrors that eschew battle for some kind of horrible game, some kind of horrible betting game, some kind of, where the stakes are high. He would probably show up like Oniskelis or Gope, and he would pose some kind of riddle.
I love it. I love it. He'd be hated instantly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Stalker. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't have a good name, but I know that it would like whatever character that I picked would be a mains, like lowest level, like the bottom of the rung, would have to crawl his way up the hierarchy. I don't know. I don't have a good name. It's because the thing is, like, all the good names, one, are either taken or way more creative than I am. So I'm not gonna even try.
For me, my demon name would be Betty. And Betty is a chaotic good Baylor who has had to pretend to be chaotic evil in order to survive for the millennia that he or it has in the Abyss. Otherwise, she would have been found out ages ago and destroyed. But she's survived for so long by pretending to be evil that she's no longer even sure whether she's good or evil. And sometimes will just randomly perpetuate evil violence on her minions or fellow demons to make sure that she's still pretending good enough to be evil, but still believes she's good. And it's really a question as to which one she is. She does terribly evil things, but mostly so that she can keep pretending she's not good.
Wow.
Does she make cakes and cookies? And is her last name Crocker?
No, but I think your demon's named Crocker. I think
that's what it is. I'd be under your Betty. It'd be the mains and it'd be Crocker, and like you'd be sitting there beating me while I'm like making you like a snack. Betty's Crocker.
Oh my God.
I went straight to Betty Page. I can't help it. As soon as you said Betty, yeah.
Betty White. There's a lot of ways we could go with this.
Yeah.
She might be a demon. Who knows?
That's it. Actually, it's Betty the White. That's my Baylor's name, Betty the White, and she's an albino Baylor.
Wow. Okay, I don't have any lore for my name, but I came up with Morzanek. But I'd have to roll on a table. I've got zero attachment to backstory with this character.
More Stalker asks, more snack. That's a good. I like that. More snack.
More snack. No,
I might just be hungry.
I think you're just hungry. It's dinner time.
Betty Crocker, more snack.
Well, that is what we have to call it today. There is so much more we could go and talk about with demons. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 to this sometime. And if we do, I would totally have you back, Ryan, because there's tons to ask about in terms of design for demons and designing a campaign that we only barely got to touch on. But I'm so glad you were able to join us for the. I'm so glad you were able to enjoy us for this episode.
I mean that too, hopefully.
Well, I mean, it's been my pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking to you guys, and it went by in a flash. So, thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Is there anything that we should be shooting fans or listeners to? Anything you're working on currently?
D&D wise, I mean, I'm trying my best. It looks like the guild's not going to print paper anymore for most of us. So I may take the project elsewhere in legal terms, always trying to follow whatever the license says. I'll have to see, I have basically flipped 360 degrees, and every day that I work on it, I'm looking at vivid blues and bright yellows, no more blood red. I've been in like happy rainbow land ever since Mears. It just sort of happened, but my project right now is, let me ask you this. What is an archetype that D&D kind of sort of had for a few hot minutes, but really doesn't?
Yeah, so like the ninja has been out for a long time. I would.
Well, I am aiming to allow you to pretend that we have all along D&D always had the jester. Every single table I've ever been at, there's always been a player who wants to push, antics, jokes, and maybe purposely get in trouble, maybe purposely, like it's their job, kind of meddle a little bit. Not to the point where, I can't stress this enough if I ever release this class, not to the point where they carry the game away per night. But I think a lot of players really want an outlet for, being kind of, a trickster. And I'm not really happy with most everything that's been written up over the last, 30 years. So I am aiming in my own awkward fashion, which will take way too much time and effort, to give you like basically what amounts to every single possible thing you could need to play a jester in a very fun and serious manner, as if the class always existed.
All right. So thank you all so much for hanging out with us. And I hope you enjoyed our informative session on demons and oh God, why am I blanking the name of the campaign? Something of mirrors.
Mirrors of the Abyss.
She's blocked it
Thank
out.
you.
She's blocked it out.
Yeah,
She's had trauma.
I'm tired.
She's traumatic.
it's-
I'm sorry. She was traumatized. She's also traumatic.
Traumatized by my book. That's happened before. You know, I had a player cut his own thing off in my game. So,
Oh my god.
Wow.
you know, there's trauma. There's trauma to be had in mirrors. I'm sad to say, there's definitely trauma.
Yeah, it's a traumatic campaign.
You know, Stalker, we haven't talked about that. Maybe that's another piece for your character we could work in.
Another piece. Okay, no.
No.
Another piece of Stalker that goes.
Oh god, we're done. Thank you all so much for hanging out, and keep an eye on our Twitter for updates as to our next recording session. Have a good week. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Stay safe, everyone.